If you're a longtime viewer, then you probably already know that I like the Buick Encore. I think it's a great upgrade from the average subcompact crossover in America, and a good alternative to someone that is looking at a RAV4 or CR-V and wants something that's a little bit easier to park, but they don't want to give up some of those nicer touches inside. And that's sort of the same formula that we see in this new Encore GX. Oddly enough, for 2020, the GX is not replacing the Encore. So in the US for this model year at least, and for 2021, we're going to be getting two Encores, the slightly smaller Encore and the slightly larger GX. This is trying to straddle the difference between the Encore and the Envision in Buick's lineup. They've decided to go all in on crossovers lately. But this is closer to the Encore rather than the Envision in size. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if after 2021 the Encore does end up disappearing, because for 2021 they have reduced it to just two trims only, so that way there's not quite as much overlap between this and the slightly smaller model. You should also know that if you've seen pictures of a new Encore out there, we are getting a new Encore in China and certain other markets around the world, but not in the United States. They claim that that platform wasn't really designed with American tastes in mind. This year is bringing us two new subcompact crossovers from GM. We have the Encore GX here, and then we have the closely related Chevy Trailblazer. The Trailblazer is targeting more directly entries like the Jeep Compass, the Ford EcoSport, Hyundai Kona, and this is trying to be between something like that and a BMW X1 or a Mercedes-Benz GLA. So Buick certainly makes some luxury market comparisons with the Encore, but the GX is priced somewhere between these two worlds. This is $24,100 starting, the Trailblazer is $19,000 starting, and a lot of those luxury options start well over $35,000. So as you'd expect, living in this premium world, somewhere between mainstream and luxury, we find touches of both worlds here. We find LED headlamps in this trim, we have a projector LED headlamp right over here, and then reflector high beams. We have LED fog lamps below and incandescent turn signals right there in the middle. This model has well-integrated front parking sensors. We have a 360-degree camera system, something that you'll find on this at a lower sticker price than a 360-degree camera system in something like a Toyota RAV4. And we don't have a radar sensor up front because this one's adaptive cruise control system is camera-based, a little bit more like what we see in the Subaru lineup rather than radar-based, which is what we see in some other GM vehicles. The Encore GX isn't just a tweener when it comes to its price tag, slotting between mainstream and luxury. It's also a tweener in its length. 171.4 inches long puts this 3 inches longer than a Buick Encore, about 3 inches shorter than a Volvo XC40, 1 inch longer than a Honda HR-V, but still solidly a subcompact or entry-level crossover, however you want to define that in the United States. This is a full foot shorter than the Buick Envision, which is their mid-size crossover, and definitely shorter than something like a RAV4 or CR-V or a Volkswagen Tiguan. And again, I think that in a weird sort of way, looking at this as an upgrade or an alternative to your average compact crossover in America makes a lot of sense. Because if you're shopping for a Tiguan or a CR-V or a RAV4 or an Equinox or some of the other GMC alternatives that you're going to find on the same lot as this Buick, you might want to get this for its premium interior touches, some of the cargo practical touches we find inside, if you don't need as much cargo room or as much rear seat room as you find in the average compact crossover. Or again, if you're looking for something that's easier to park. Out back, the restrained and elegant design theme continues. We have combination tail lamp modules, which means that the brake lights are LEDs, but the turn signals are incandescent lights. The backup lights are located right down there a little bit lower on the bumper. We have a two-tone paint scheme going on here where we have a white body and then we have these gray lower panels, which I think is a refreshing departure from the sort of matte black that we see on so many crossovers out there. We have faux exhaust tips down here, although these are not quite as egregious as some of the ones that we find on modern Volkswagen and Audi models. I suppose you could call these more styling elements. They didn't try and close it off and make it fully look like an exhaust tip. The real exhaust is tucked up under the bumper. At the moment, there are 2 engines and 2 transmissions on offer in the GX. Today we're driving what Buick says is the most popular engine. That's the 1.3-liter 3-cylinder turbo and the CVT with front-wheel drive. If you're wondering how smooth the 1.3-liter turbo engine can be, I have to say this is one of the smoothest 3-cylinders that I've ever driven, and I was really impressed with this. It's quiet at idle, it doesn't really bop around a lot like some 3-cylinder engine designs can, and it doesn't sound overtly like a 3-cylinder out on the open road. Now, if you get the base GX, we get a 1.2-liter 3-cylinder turbocharged engine that's related to this engine but produces less power, 137 horsepower and 162 pound-feet of torque. This one produces 155 horsepower and 174 pound-feet of torque, but more important than that torque bump over the 1.2, this one produces much more low-end torque. According to GM, this engine produces all 174 pound-feet of torque at just 1,600 RPM. That is quite different than the 1.2. The continuously variable transmission that we're driving today is the only transmission offered behind the 1.2-liter engine. If you get the 1.3-liter engine, which again is going to be the more popular engine, this is going to use the CVT only with front-wheel drive. If you choose all-wheel drive, then you get a 9-speed automatic, basically the same 9-speed that we find in a variety of different GM products. It is not related at all to the 9-speed that we find in Honda, Acura, or FCA products. The best fuel economy is in the model that we're driving today with the 1.3-liter engine, not the 1.2-liter engine. That one gets 28 miles per gallon combined, this one 31 miles per gallon combined, or if you choose all-wheel drive, it drops down to match the front-wheel drive 1.2-liter engine. What's going on there? Well, Buick says that this engine has all of their latest fuel-saving technologies, and that resulted in a more expensive engine. The 1.2-liter engine was designed to give this a lower base sticker price, also be used in something like the Chevy Trailblazer. It doesn't have those more modern fuel-saving technologies. That's the big difference between the two, and that's why its fuel economy is 3 miles per gallon lower than this. Oddly enough, Buick has given the Encore GX a tow rating. Admittedly, it's not a very big tow rating, but 1,000 pounds when properly equipped is still bigger than most subcompact crossovers. According to Buick, this tow rating is targeted at someone that wants to be able to put a cargo carrier back here, or a bike rack, or a small trailer to put your ride-on lawnmower and drive that in for service. This was not targeted at someone that wants to take a big camping trailer somewhere. Front seat comfort's definitely good in the Encore, although the score really depends on what you want to compare this to. If you're comparing this against entries like a RAV4 or CR-V, then I'd say this is a 9 out of 10 point seat. We don't have four-way adjustable lumbar support, which we do see in a very select number of compact mainstream crossovers, but we do have a seating position that is very comfortable. It's also a little bit more upright than some of the competition. We have a tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion and a 2-position memory over there on the door. The passenger seat does not have the same range of electric motion as the driver's seat, but there's a good reason for that, and that reason is this fold-flat design. Although it would be possible to have a front seat fold flat and still offer an electric recline functionality, that would be a lot more expensive and it'd be less likely to make it into a vehicle like the Buick, so personally I think this is a great compromise. A nice touch is that we still have the 2-way adjustable lumbar support over here, and the seat bottom cushion has the same range of motion as the driver's seat. Hopping into the back seat, we find just a hair more legroom than we find in the smaller Encore, but oddly enough, just a little bit less headroom. Scooting over to the middle seat, you'll notice that headroom is still pretty generous, however. I have about ½ an inch of headroom left. I could very comfortably sit right back here in the middle because the floor is completely flat across the rear. That is, of course, excepting the small area where the center console and the seat rails are mounted. Scooting all the way over to the right side of the vehicle, I have a little bit more room because that front seat is folded completely flat, so if you wanted to, you could stretch out like that. Or if you had a child seat in the back, you could put a child seat here, leave that front seat folded flat if you don't have a passenger up there, have easier access to your child, have that child feel a little bit more involved in where you're going. And those child seats are going to fit a little better back here than in the smaller Encore because of the amount of legroom and the amount of rear seat width. This is wider across the back than we find in the smaller Encore. If we don't have more legroom than we find in the regular Encore, why might you want the GX? Well, you'll find that right back here. First thing, we have a power hatch rather than the manual hatch that we find in the Encore. And the other thing is a lot more cargo room. 23.5 cubic feet of cargo room back here. That puts this right in contention with some of the smaller compact crossovers in America, something like a Hyundai Tucson. And that puts this in very direct competition with some of the really space-practical mainstream entries like a Honda HR-V or a Kia Soul. The cargo practicality afforded by that fold-flat front passenger seat is really obvious when we fold down the rear passenger seat. They put the 60% side on the passenger side of the vehicle, making it a lot easier to put large and bulky items in here. Whether you want to carry a cello with you somewhere, or whether you want to put a ladder in your small crossover, it's going to be easier in here than some compact crossovers that don't have a fold-flat front passenger seat. The load floor features a 2-stage design. You can also fold it to make it a little bit easier to put it somewhere, and then under that we find a compact spare tire. The cargo cover is unfortunately one of these hard variety with these little strings to help pull it out of the way when you open the hatch, although fortunately it is designed so that it will go completely under the load floor there. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in one of the upper end trims, but we are not in the absolute top end trim, so there are a few things missing in here. For instance, we don't have a moonroof. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts and 2-way adjustable headrests. Here's another view of those folding seats. I don't mean to belabor this, but I really love this feature. I had a Volvo with a fold flat front passenger seat, and it was one of the handiest things ever. Moving over to the front doors, we find more soft touch material than we find in mainstream crossovers. So this entire upper half of the door is all made from soft touch materials, the upper section there and that armrest. We then have hard plastics down there at the bottom of the door around the bottle holder. This interior design definitely feels fresher and more modern and just more premium than in the smaller Buick Encore, quite logically because this is newer. So as we move on over to the dashboard, we find more premium touches, soft touch materials upper and lower. This is also a soft touch piece right down here, something that we don't normally find in mainstream crossovers, although the lid for the glove box is a hard plastic. That glove compartment is a bin-style compartment. I was barely able to fit a 10-inch tablet computer inside. Depending on the trim level you get, there are a few different accent options on the dashboard. This is sort of a faux knurled metal look with a gloss covering on it. You can see we have a tweeter right up there in the A-pillar for this particular audio system. Moving on over to the middle of the dashboard, we have a fairly large touchscreen infotainment system. As you can see, this supports Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, and there's some large air vents above it. This is running the latest version of GM's infotainment software that we see in a wide variety of their vehicles. There's some physical buttons right there below the screen. It's definitely snappy and easy to use. Below that, we have the controls for the dual zone automatic climate control system. There are a lot of buttons and knobs going on there. We then have the USB inputs for that infotainment system and the SD card slot. There's a wireless charging mat below there and a 12-volt power port. We then have a pretty traditional console shifter down here. Low mode is all the way back. Drive is one notch above that. Keep in mind we are in the model with the CVT. And then there's some manual shift buttons right there on the side of the shifter. In front of the shifter area, we have a button to disable the auto start-stop system. Some people are really offended by a lack of that particular button. So if you are, don't worry, there's one in here. Lane keeping assistance button, stability and traction control, park sense buttons, and then the semi-autonomous parking system right there. We then have two pretty decently sized cup holders on the right side of that shifter. There's an electric parking brake right behind. Pretty sizable storage bin right here between the front seats. No lid on that one, but there is additional storage under the center armrest. If I lift that out of the way, you can see we have a little tray. Take those cables out, and then this lifts out. We have a pretty deep storage area. Our model has the available heads-up display, and very much like we see in a number of mini models, this heads-up display is not projected on the windshield itself, but on this small piece of plastic right there instead. If I turn off the system or if I stop the car, that plastic sheet does descend into the dashboard. Systems like this generally project an image that's smaller than ones that project on the windshield, but you can see we have a variety of different information there available. They also tend not to be as adjustable for height as systems that project on the windshield, but they're a lot less expensive. The instrument cluster features a combination of different elements. We have an analog speedometer and analog tachometer with needles. We then have an LED gauge for the fuel level and the engine temperature. They kind of are styled like they should have a needle, but instead we have LEDs in rows. Then we have a multifunction LCD in the middle that's a little bit over 4 inches. This gives us things like our typical trip computer readouts, oil life, infotainment readouts, turn-by-turn navigation directions, access to the phone interface, and certain settings just for this display. Most vehicle settings are done via the infotainment system in the dashboard. The steering wheel is a round 3-spoke design with sport grips up top and a split bottom spoke. On the right side of the wheel, we find the controls for that multifunction LCD, also a phone and voice command button. On the left side, we find the controls for the adaptive cruise control system and the steering wheel heat button. If you're wondering where the infotainment controls are, they're located on the back of the steering wheel. We have volume up and down over here on the right side, track forward, backward over here on the left. Why on the back of the steering wheel? Well, quite simply, you don't have to look at the steering wheel in order to activate those controls, so it means less idle time off the road, because looking at the steering wheel won't really tell you anything about those buttons. There are some tactile grips back there to help you find them. Obviously, we'll talk about this a bit more in the comparison section, but perhaps the best way to think of the Encore GX is as an alternative to a mainstream compact crossover and an upgrade from something like the Chevy Trailblazer or a Honda HR-V or a Toyota CHR. Price-wise, this ends up being very similar to something like a RAV4 or CR-V, and the experience in the cabin definitely feels a step above something like the HR-V or CHR, but this is not quite like a BMW X1 or Mercedes-Benz GLA or Volvo XC40 out on the road, both in terms of the luxury features offered or in terms of the way the Encore GX drives. Performance figures are probably going to be the biggest differentiator. 0 to 60 happens in this model in 8.9 seconds. That's a bit more similar to something like the HR-V or CHR than something like the XC40 or X1. That makes sense because we don't have as much power going on in the Encore GX as we find in those full-on luxury entries. And the logical reason for that in the Buick lineup is, of course, Cadillac's XT4. Since General Motors has a luxury segment entry, they didn't want the Encore GX to step too much on the toes of Cadillac's entry in that segment. Braking scores are also a little bit long. It took 132 feet for this vehicle to stop from highway speeds back down to 0. Most of the luxury entries will stop at around 120 feet or less, but most of the mainstream entries are going to be right here around 132. Now, also in this performance neighborhood is going to be something like the Nissan Rogue, and it's going to be priced pretty similarly to the Encore GX. And in that comparison, the Encore GX's performance figures are absolutely no problem at all. And when you get this out on your favorite winding road, it is going to feel a bit more nimble than those larger crossovers as well. Now, clearly there are going to be luxury options that are going to handle better than this. Again, the BMW, the Mercedes, etc. Those are definitely going to handle better than the Encore GX, and that's why I'm going to give this a B when it comes to handling. But as far as mainstream subcompacts go, handling ability is definitely excellent. So I would take the handling ability of this over something like the Honda HR-V any day. And again, an interesting comparison to a compact crossover. The Encore GX certainly feels smaller and more nimble out on roads like this. Definitely also smaller and more nimble in parking lot situations than something like the Nissan Rogue, while also having a polish level that is definitely better than we find in some of the mainstream competition. So the way the front suspension behaves, the way that it goes over bumps, the fact that the rear suspension does not get upset over broken pavement in the corners, definitely speaks of the higher price tag we find in the Encore than the subcompact competition like a Nissan Kicks. Although this doesn't have the same kind of soft ride as your grandmother's Buick, it definitely has a well-controlled ride. So even out on rougher pavement like we're driving on here, this still soaks up bumps better than the average small crossover. Now, the wheelbase is still relatively short in the GX, so there are situations where you can get a little bit of bobblehead feel, something that we see in a number of other small crossovers out there, but it's very well controlled in here, just about as well controlled as you'll find in the luxury entries. In our cabin noise score, we got 71.5 decibels at 50 miles an hour, so I'm easily going to give this an A+ when it comes to cabin noise. Not only is this quieter than the average subcompact crossover in America, this is also quieter than most mainstream compact crossovers in America. This is definitely quieter than the RAV4 or the CR-V out on the same road surface. A smooth ride and a quiet cabin have long been hallmarks of the Buick brand, and that continues for their new crossovers. I'm also a little bit surprised that the 3-cylinder engine is as quiet and as smooth as it is. It's hard to tell in this video, but it kind of sounds like a V6 engine. Now, that makes sense harmonically because this is essentially half of a V6 engine, and you get very similar harmonics to one side of a V6. Sometimes at idle, I have noticed just a hint more vibration in the cabin than in some of the competition, but it's worth noting that there are definitely some rougher around the edges 4-cylinder engines in mainstream crossovers. Oddly enough, I really don't mind the sounds that this engine makes. It kind of reminds me of a 1990s Buick with the old 3.8-liter V6 engine. Now, you will definitely be hearing a little bit more of this engine than in some luxury competitors because we get a little bit less sound deadening between the engine and the firewall, and because we have a continuously variable transmission. That is another key difference between this and the luxury segment. At the moment, there is no luxury segment vehicle other than the Lexus Ux, which is sort of a competitor to this, with a CVT. As far as CVTs go, it's not too slow in responding, but you can feel that this does not shift as quickly as Honda's CVT or the CVTs that we find in Hyundai and Kia vehicles. In terms of transmission shifts, this feels a little bit more like the Toyota or Nissan CVTs, where the shifts are a little bit sluggish, a little bit gradual. As far as automatic transmission comparisons go, pretty much any automatic out there is going to feel faster and snappier than this. Now, Buick does give us a manual transmission mode, and we get kind of a novelty here, because if I put this in L1, it'll just hang out here at this particular ratio until you shift it. And I haven't encountered a CVT that will do that. It'll just hang out there and cut the fuel just like a regular automatic transmission. And then when you shift it, you get kind of the mushy shifts that you've come to expect from a CVT that's imitating a stepped automatic. In steady state highway travel at 70 miles an hour with the cruise control set, it's absolutely no problem at all for this drivetrain to yield you over 40 miles per gallon. So if you're looking for an over 40 mile per gallon cruiser without a hybrid system, this is going to be one of the few crossovers that will do that. And I suspect that even when equipped with the 9-speed automatic transmission, you're probably still going to be getting very high 30 mpgs out on the highway. But as with any modern engine out there, the more you stomp on the go pedal, the lower your fuel economy average is going to be. Bottom line, out on the road, I'm almost as impressed with the Encore GX as I was the original Encore when it launched. This does feel a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier, The engine isn't quite as smooth because it is a 3-cylinder turbocharged engine, but I like the power delivery that we get here. It's not quick, obviously 8.9 seconds 0 to 60, but because GM has tuned this to give you an incredible amount of torque at low RPMs, we get maximum torque at just 1600 RPM. It doesn't feel sluggish when hill climbing until you need to pass someone and floor them. Then you'll realize that this is not as fast as the competition. But the rest of the time out on the road, driving for 99% of the time, this engine is going to feel more than adequate, and it definitely is going to have a peppy feel. General Motors has been accused of blurring the lines between their brands in the past, and I think rightly so. But the Encore is a little bit different because, again, this starts significantly more expensive than the Chevy Trailblazer, about $4,000. But on the other hand, it's significantly less than the Cadillac XT4, so it's stuck right here in the middle between the average subcompact crossover like a Honda HR-V or a Jeep Compass or something along those lines, and the luxury set like the XT4, which starts at $35,395. In fact, I think that the Encore's existence has allowed the XT4 to go a little bit further upmarket, and that makes an awful lot of sense. However, if you get everything on your Encore, then you'll end up at about $38,000, and that is just barely inside that luxury segment. A BMW X1, for instance, starts at $35,200, and a value entry in that luxury segment, like the Lexus Ux, will start at $32,300. But all of those are significantly more expensive than a Honda HR-V, which starts about $4,000 less than the Buick. I think the best way to think of the Encore is that the interior has the bones to compete with some of those base options in the full luxury segment, but the drivetrain is more like a mainstream crossover in terms of power figures and transmission type. Remember, we do have that CVT. This creates an interesting mix that's a little bit difficult to compare, but let's dive right into it anyway. Our first competitor here is going to be the Mazda CX-30, because the CX-30 is trying to be the upscale mainstream entry, not trying to be a separate luxury or near luxury brand. Mazda has said that they're trying to move their models upscale, but they're not trying to compete with Acura or necessarily Buick at the same time. And that's part of why the CX-30 is less expensive. It starts at $21,900 and will top out to about $30,000, so it doesn't quite have the same kind of range as the Encore. But the Mazda has a lot going for it. It's on the large side of this segment because it really is just a lifted Mazda 3 hatchback that's had some sheet metal changes. It has a really elegantly designed interior, essentially borrowed out of the Mazda 3 and then adjusted for the size increase on the CX-30. It also borrows the 2.5-liter engine from the Mazda 3. Now, that might change because the Mazda 3 just got a new standard 2-liter engine that definitely produces less power, but at the moment, the CX-30 is one of the most powerful entries in the segment, and it is more powerful than the Buick Encore at 186 horsepower. Now, on the downside, the CX-30 is not quite the zoom vehicle compared to the luxury entry vehicles that you might be hoping for, mainly because of the rear suspension design. It definitely is not as elegant as a fully independent rear suspension that we saw in the previous generation Mazda 3, and you'll really notice that if you start pushing the CX-30 harder in corners, the rear suspension just can't handle that kind of abuse, and it does give out far before something like an XT4, an X1, a Q3, a GLA, etc., or the Buick Encore. I think the Encore suspension design is a little bit more elegant. However, when it comes to design, I think the CX-30 is really beautiful, and if I were simply buying one just on looks, I might get the CX-30 over the Encore. It's not going to be quite as practical on the inside, however, because it doesn't have that fold-flat front passenger seat. It also has a shorter warranty than the Buick. That brings me along to the Lexus Ux, our first luxury segment entry, and I think the best fit as far as comparisons go in the luxury group. Not only is the Ux less expensive, it starts at $32,300, that's thousands of dollars less than the German or other European options, but the Ux is the only entry in this group that has a CVT and has a little bit less power than you might be expecting, 169 horsepower, or the optional hybrid system essentially out of the Toyota Prius. On paper, it might seem like the Lexus should be a little bit faster than the Encore, but remember, this is not a turbocharged engine in the base model, it's a naturally aspirated engine, and that means that 0 to 60 times really aren't that far off. And to be honest, the Lexus UX feels pretty sluggish whether we're talking about the base option or the hybrid version. What's odd about the Lexus UX is that if you don't get the hybrid, you can't get all-wheel drive. It's front-wheel drive only, a little bit more like some of the mainstream crossovers we see out there. And if you do get the hybrid system, then the all-wheel drive system is an e-all-wheel drive unit, basically borrowed out of the Toyota Prius, so it sends very little power to the rear. It's not at all going to feel like an XT4 or an X1 or a Q3 out on the road in those slipperier conditions. It's going to help get you out of some of those situations and make you feel a little bit more stable, but it's certainly not as capable as a traditional all-wheel drive system. It's also important to remember that this is still a Lexus, and it is still luxury priced. So if you get carried away with options, it'll go on up to $45,000, which is pretty pricey for basically a small compact hatchback with a hybrid drivetrain. So how about my top pick in the luxury subcompact segment at the moment, the Volvo XC40? I think the XC40 has a lot of great things going for it. It has a decent amount of power. There are two different engines currently on offer, 187 horsepower or 248 horsepower from a turbocharged engine, traditional 8-speed automatic transmission. Interestingly enough, it's essentially a Toyota automatic transmission. And we have all the usual things that you'd expect in a full-on luxury brand. We have better leather, more attention to detail going on inside, real wood trim, more advanced safety technologies available, a lot more choices when it comes to colors, interior colors, exterior colors, etc. There are things like adaptive suspensions available, improved driving dynamics, and of course the snazzier brand logo. And that is an important thing to keep in mind. Some of what you're paying for when you move up into the Volvo or the Audi or the Mercedes or the BMW is really just the brand. But not everything is explained away by simply the brand. The XC40 is going to be the better handling option. It really feels very planted out on the road. It has a great handling dynamic in this segment as well, and it's surprisingly quick. You have to work your way pretty far up the European ladder in order to get a Mercedes or a BMW that is faster 0 to 60 than the XC40 T5. And if you're interested in a plug-in hybrid or a full EV version, it's likely that we're going to get the plug-in hybrid of the XC40 here soon, and we already know that the EV version is coming in 2021. But on the downside, you're certainly going to pay for that, because the XC40 starts at $33,700, significantly more expensive than the starting price of the Encore, and will go on up to nearly $60,000 if you get carried away with all those options. Now, logically, the Encore is not targeting the same kind of shopper that the X1, the X2, and the GLA are, or even the XC40 or Lexus Ux. It's targeting a more middle-of-the-road shopper, and there are more shoppers in that category, and that's why the Encore has been so successful. In fact, the Encore in 2019 outsold the X1, the XC40, the GLA, the Q3, the UX, the Evoque, and the Jaguar E-Pace combined. In fact, when you take a look at the sales charts, the Encore is up there with some pretty big mainstream names, and that's why I think an interesting competitor is something like the Toyota RAV4. I've already talked about this a little bit, but let's dive into it deeper. What do we get with the Toyota RAV4 versus the Encore? Well, the RAV4 is $25,950 starting. It is a bit more expensive. We get an extra cylinder, we get a traditional 8-speed automatic transmission, and it is a little bit longer. It's 5 inches longer, and most of that extra length goes to the cargo area. You're able to fit 2 more 24-inch roller bags in the back. But because of its design and Toyota's decision to focus on cargo practicality, the RAV4 has only 2 inches more combined legroom than we find in the Encore. So depending on exactly what you're doing with your crossover, there may not be much of a difference. If your frequent load is 1 or 2 passengers, perhaps 4 passengers and a few bags in the back, you're not going to notice a world of difference between the Encore and the RAV4. Driving the two vehicles back to back with our long-term RAV4 hybrid, honestly, the Encore fits 99% of the use situations, and it definitely has some advantages up its sleeves, like the fold-flat front passenger seat. The interior also feels a little bit more refined, although the drivetrain doesn't feel as powerful as we find in the RAV4. And then, of course, there's the price tag. Comparably equipped, the Buick is going to be less expensive than the RAV4, have a longer standard warranty, and I think a slightly nicer interior as well. And that's obviously before we even take into account the average discount available at the Buick dealer, which is going to be generally a little bit more than we find at the Toyota dealer. Bottom line, the Encore has always been a great little crossover, and I think the Encore GX takes things to the next level. It really is no surprise that the Encore has sold so well that it now represents nearly half of all Buick sales in the United States. And it really is the impetus for Buick deciding to shift towards a crossover-centric brand rather than a sedan-focused brand like they had been in the past. I think it also represents an interesting and perhaps tough choice for someone out there that is looking at something like the RAV4 or the CR-V, but wants something that's a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to park, something that has a slightly longer warranty, a better brand experience, etc. All those things factor into a lot of folks' purchases, and I think the Encore really hits an interesting sweet spot. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below, and if you were shopping in this segment, what would you pick? Would you be willing to spend more for a luxury option that definitely is an objectively better car, but is also significantly more expensive? Or would you look at something like the Encore? Or would you go to a mainstream crossover like a RAV4 and CR-V for a little bit more that gives you a little bit more room, but not necessarily more features or more refinement? Let me know all that down there in the comment section below. Be sure to find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos. If you want to check out the lighter side of things, find us at Instagram as well, and I'll see all of you next week.